Do you believe that a simple smile can change an entire life? At Sonny's Grill, a small diner on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, 27-year-old waitress Nora Bennett only dreams of coastal road trips in her old pickup truck. But what happens when a silent boy and his billionaire father walk in, drawing her into a tear-filled story? Can Nora's small acts of kindness break down a wall of silence and touch both their hearts? All right, dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm about to share, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see you tuning in from every corner of the globe. A quiet Tuesday morning, Nora Bennett stood behind the counter at Sonny's Grill. Her hands drifted over the familiar wood surface, her mind wandering through simple dreams. The bell above the door jingled sharply, slicing through her thoughts. A boy of about 7 stepped in, his large green eyes scanning every corner as if seeking refuge. His small hand gripped the edge of the man's coat beside him, knuckles white with effort. If he let go, he seemed to believe he'd lose something precious. The man, clad in a perfectly tailored gray suit, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, offered Nora a polite but cold nod before his gaze snapped to his phone's screen. He sat and tapped furiously. The boy slid into the seat across, fiddling at the table's edge, silent. Nora, whose tender heart had been shaped by years of indifference, felt an invisible bond with the child. She'd grown used to shy kids, but his eyes, deep and full of unheard questions, made her pause. She approached, a warm smile as invitation, and asked softly, "What would you like to drink, little one?" He lowered his head, shoulders inching up, eyes glued to the tabletop, as if her words were a cold wind. The man, eyes fixed on his phone, snapped, "He doesn't talk. Don't waste your time." Those few harsh words cut not just the air, but Nora's own heart. She froze, not because of his chill, but because of the boy's eyes, flickering with fear as if shoved deeper into the void of invisibility. His silence, Nora realized, was not mere timidity. It was a wall built of deep wounds, impenetrable. Her chest tightened with a familiar weight, memories of childhood when her own voice was drowned by louder sounds. The boy's tiny hands toyed with the table's edge, as though fighting not to vanish. Silently, Nora brought him a glass of orange juice, placed it before him, her gaze never leaving his small face. When he touched the glass, fingers trembling, she noticed a faint scar on the back of his hand, like a silvery thread, hinting at an untold story. That little scar, haunting in its modesty, spoke of what he had endured, a secret he carried in silence. In Nora's heart, a spark kindled, not ambition, but a simple longing. She knew nothing of the boy, nor why he had locked up his voice, but she felt the loneliness radiating from each small gesture. His eyes, though avoiding hers, held a world both curious and terrified, like a bird caged, desperate to fly yet unsure how. The man, with his air of power and cold indifference, seemed part of that wall. He neither looked at him nor touched him, lost in calls and figures, treating the child as a fading shadow in his life. Nora did not judge. She knew nothing of his story, but she saw the chasm between father and son, deep and frozen. When the boy sipped the orange juice, lips set tight, fingers still shaking, each swallow seemed an act of great will. Nora stood quietly behind the counter, eyes fixed on him. She thought of herself, of moments she had longed for someone to pause and listen, even for a second. His silence was more than a barrier. It was a fragile plea for help. Nora had no grand plan, no strategy, but she knew she could not turn away. She would begin with the smallest of gestures, like casting a pebble into still water, hoping for ripples. The bell rang again, but her mind remained with the boy and his mysterious scar, an untold story waiting for someone to listen. The next morning, the bell at Sonny's grill jingled again. Nora looked up, her heart fluttering when she saw the boy step in, his hand still gripping the man's coat. They had returned, like a new rhythm in her day. The following day they appeared again. Nora, whose sensitive heart had been honed by years in a house where her voice was drowned out, felt a powerful urge. She wanted to reach the boy, not with words but with small gestures, like pebbles cast into a still pond, hoping to send ripples through his silent world. Nora began with a simple gesture. She placed a blue-colored pencil beside his sandwich plate, along with a small slip of paper bearing a hastily drawn smiley face. Crude lines, yet warm. She whispered softly, her voice a promise. "This is for you." The boy looked up. His green eyes sparkled with a flicker of curiosity. Then he lowered his gaze, his finger brushing the pencil as though weighing a vast decision. The father, James Harper, the Atlanta real estate tycoon, did not notice. He sat across, glued to his phone, his tone icy as he haggled over $1 million deal, as if the boy and the world around him did not exist. Nora watched him without judgment, but her heart sank. She sensed the chasm between father and son, a yawning void where affection seemed forgotten. The next day, Nora persisted. She sketched a little bird on a napkin, her strokes trembling like her own heart. She placed it by the boy's plate, along with a silly story about a singing bird that only sang when no one was watching. The boy listened, though he did not speak. His eyes lit with a small but brilliant spark, like a flame newly kindled. His finger twitched, touching the pencil, and slowly he drew a shaky curve on the paper, as if testing out a new language. Nora remained behind the counter, her pulse racing. She saw in that gesture a silent courage, a tiny step beyond the wall of his silence. One morning, a miracle occurred. After accepting a fresh-colored pencil from Nora, the boy sat quietly, head bowed, yet his hand moved without cease. As Nora passed by, he timidly slid a sheet of paper across to her, hesitant, yet resolute. On it was a crude drawing, a short-haired girl with a broad smile standing beside a radiant sun, rough lines yet full of meaning. Nora froze, her heart skipping a beat. She looked at the boy, his eyes briefly averted, but the corner of his mouth crept upward into almost a smile, fragile, yet enough to melt her soul. "Is that me? It's beautiful," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. She pinned the drawing to the bulletin board behind the counter, treating it as a priceless work of art. The boy watched, hands gripping the table's edge, but his gaze no longer fled. Nora sensed a change, however small. She thought of herself, of days when she longed for someone to truly see her. The boy, with his trembling strokes, was trying to say something, not with words but with his heart. James, the father, remained absorbed in his world, ears glued to his phone, unaware that his son had just taken a small step out of darkness. Nora did not blame him. She knew nothing of his story, but she saw the boy's loneliness, like a long shadow cast over every small action. She stood behind the counter, gripping her towel, her resolve firm. She would continue, armed with colored pencils, with drawings, with tiny moments, in the hope that one day the boy's wall of silence would crumble, and his voice would ring out, even if only a single word. Nora and the boy, during those repeated mornings at Sonny's Grill, gradually formed a silent ritual, a thread invisible yet binding their two souls. Nora, with a heart sharpened by years of growing up amid indifference, found joy in touching his world, not with words, but through small, delicate actions like sketches on paper. She began with old Johnny Cash melodies, humming softly as she poured coffee or wiped the counter, her voice gentle as a lullaby. The boy, seated opposite his busy father, listened. At times, the chopsticks in his hand tapped ever so lightly to the rhythm, tiny sounds, yet full of meaning, as though he was answering in his own way. Each day, Nora sought to leave her mark. She wrote tiny notes, simple words like brave or shine, and stuck them on his salt shaker and mustard jar. Those little scraps of paper, humble and unassuming, were her messages, small lights illuminating the darkness in his heart. She watched him read them, his fingertip tracing each letter. His green eyes flickered as though those words planted seeds within him. Nora felt her heart warm, yet heavy. She knew his wall of silence would not tumble easily, and every small step was a quiet victory. One morning, Nora decided to try something new. She folded a paper bus ticket with careful creases and wrote on it a single word: journey. She placed it beside his glass of milk, along with a wink and a whispered promise. This is a ticket for a special trip. Only you know the destination. The boy stared at the ticket, his small hands clutching it as if it were a key to a world only he could unlock. His eyes gleamed, not with sudden joy, but with a fragile hope, like a spark newly kindled in the dark. Nora stood behind the counter, her heart pounding, sensing a change, though not yet clear. The next day, James Harper, the father, once again immersed himself in his world, his voice icy over the phone as he berated someone for a contract error. The boy sat quietly beside him, but his hand fumbled in his jacket pocket, touching the paper ticket as if it were a treasure. Then, in a sudden moment, he whispered, so softly that Nora almost missed it. Journey. That word, as fragile as a breath, stunned her. She froze, her rag halted mid-wipe, her heart hammering like it would burst. She looked at him. His eyes avoided hers, yet the corner of his mouth twitched, as if that single word had summoned all his courage. He pressed the ticket deeper into his pocket, his fingers tightening, determined to shield it from the world. Nora felt a crack in the boy's silent wall, small yet unmistakable, a shaft of light through the darkness. She thought of herself, of days when she had yearned for someone to hear her, truly hear her. His word journey was not just a word. It was a door, ever so slightly ajar, leading to a place he had long locked away. James, ears glued to his phone, missed that moment. Missed the small step his son had taken out of the shadows. Nora did not blame him. She knew nothing of his story. But she saw the boy's loneliness, like a long shadow draping every small gesture. She stood quietly, her rag clenched in her hand, her heart brimming with hopeful anxiety. She knew the boy's journey had only just begun, and she, just a waitress, would remain there, with her notes, her melodies, her paper tickets, to help him find his way. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water before we continue, because the story's next twists are yet to come. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see you tuning in from all around the world. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we can keep bringing you more great tales. One torrentially rainy morning, Savannah lay shrouded in gray sheets of rain. Nora's hands trembled slightly as she poured hot cocoa, the steam rising from the cup like a silent comfort. She carried the cup to the boy, her heart heavy yet brimming with hope. In recent days, she had grown accustomed to his silence, to the invisible wall he had built. But each time she looked into those green eyes, she saw a fragment of herself, a little girl who once longed to be heard, to be seen. The boy sat there, wrapped in a crumpled blue raincoat, his small hands clutching the crudely folded paper ticket as if it were the link to a world he dared not enter. Nora set the cup down before him. Her gaze was gentle, but her heart roiled with an undercurrent of emotion, fragile yet fierce. Suddenly, the boy looked up. From his pressed lips, a hoarse but clear voice rang out. "Miss Nora." That word, small yet powerful, struck like a hammer shattering his silent wall. Nora froze, her heart pounding as if it would leap from her chest. The cocoa sloshed over, a brown stain spreading across the table, but she did not notice. She knelt to meet his eye level. Tears streamed down her cheeks, unstoppable. In that moment, her world trembled. Miss Nora was more than a sound. It was a door cracked open, proof that her little notes, her humming melodies, her paper tickets had reached him. She whispered, voice quivering, "Say it again, my friend." The boy met her gaze, hesitation flickering, then repeated more clearly with a shy smile, "Miss Nora." That smile, tentative yet radiant, melted every doubt in her heart. Within Nora, a storm of emotion surged, joy entwined with pain. She thought of her own days spent in darkness, waiting for someone to pull her out. The boy's hoarse voice had not only broken his silence, it had given her a gift, a reason to believe that small acts of kindness can change everything. Yet she saw fear in his eyes, as though speaking her name was a courageous leap into an unknown void. She yearned to embrace him, to tell him she would always be there, but she restrained herself, afraid to shatter that fragile moment. James Harper, the father, was tapping out an email on his phone when it clattered to the floor with a harsh clang. He sprang up, his normally cold features contorted as if struck by an invisible blow. "What? He spoke?" His voice shook, no longer that of an Atlanta real estate tycoon, but of a father confronting his deepest hopes. In James's heart, joy erupted, only to be snuffed by searing pain. He had spent millions, hired every expert, yet none had breached his son's wall of silence. Now a mere waitress had succeeded where he had failed. He reached out, wanting to touch his son, but the boy recoiled, clutching the paper ticket, his gaze turning away. That gesture cut him like a knife. James felt his heart shatter. He murmured, voice choked, "He never spoke to me." His face fell. He was no longer a billionaire, only a powerless father facing an unbridgeable gulf with his son. Nora looked at James and saw his reddened eyes. In that moment, she understood that he was not merely an uncaring parent, but a man wounded and trapped within his own world. She wanted to say something, but her throat constricted. The boy, ticket in hand, continued to look at Nora. His eyes seemed to say that she was the only one he trusted. Nora felt her heart tighten, both joyous and pained. She knew the boy's journey had only just begun, and that she, though only a waitress, had become part of it. Nora stood silently by the table, her gaze fixed on the boy, Finn. Her heart pounded after the moment he had shattered his wall of silence. James Harper, the father, sat back down, his hands trembling, his usually stern face twisted as though confronted with a truth too vast to bear. Within him, a storm of emotion rose, joy entwined with searing pain. He looked at Finn, the son he loved but never truly understood, and felt the yawning chasm between them, a void he had unwittingly deepened through years lost in work and private grief. He spoke, his voice hoarse, each word seeming to fight its way free. "How did you do it?" Nora, with a heart finely tuned by years of indifference, sensed that question was more than curiosity. It was a plea for help. She replied, her tone gentle yet firm. "I simply showed him that he was seen." That simple, cutting statement pierced James's invisible armor. She never took her eyes off Finn, who sat quietly, his small hands caressing the crumpled paper ticket as if it were his anchor in this world. Inside Nora, emotion surged. She thought of the days she once longed for someone to truly see her, and now she had become light for Finn through her tiny acts, notes, melodies, paper tickets. Yet she also felt a vague worry. Finn had spoken, but his journey was only beginning, and she was not sure she had the strength to walk it with him. James buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, as though he struggled against a breaking wave within. He began to confess, his words ragged, each a dagger to his own heart. 3 years ago, a car accident had stolen Finn's mother, the woman at the center of their family. Since then, Finn had fallen silent, locked himself in a silent world James could not reach. He had tried everything, hired the best specialists, spent millions, yet no one had pierced that wall. Each failure drove him deeper into helplessness, into long days lost in work to escape his pain. He looked up at Nora and said, his voice fragmented, "You achieved in a few weeks what I couldn't in 3 years." That admission was more than acknowledgement. It was a confession, a confrontation with his own failure. Within James, a painful awakening unfolded. He realized that while he built his empire, he had abandoned Finn, let his son drown in a loneliness he never understood. He wanted to make amends. He offered, his voice urgent, as though afraid this moment would vanish. Money, a home, a job in Atlanta, anything Nora desired. But Nora shook her head, her eyes resolute. "It's not about me," she said, her tone gentle yet weighty. "Finn is the one you need." That truth struck James like a blow, halting him, facing the reality that no fortune can buy closeness with one's child. Finn slid from his chair. He stepped forward, his small arms wrapping around Nora in a silent, pure embrace. He whispered, his voice soft but clear. "Journey." He pointed to her, his eyes shimmering with fledgling trust. Nora felt her heart melt. Tears traced down her cheeks, but she nodded, her voice trembling. "Together, okay?" In that moment, she felt she was no longer just a waitress. She was a lighthouse, a guide for Finn. Yet she also saw James's eyes, red-rimmed and laden, and understood that he, despite his power, was also lost. She knew Finn's journey was not only about reclaiming his voice, it was the path by which father and son would rediscover one another. James Harper, his hands trembling, slid a business card across the glossy wooden table. The Harper Enterprises logo gleamed in the dim light. Within him, a painful awakening surged, as though he'd realized for the first time how long he'd been lost in a world of power and wealth. He looked at Nora, his eyes no longer cold but weighted with a desperate plea. His voice was hoarse yet sincere as he said he wanted her to stay with Finn, not as a nanny, but as a guide, someone who could teach him how to be a father. That simple request, heavy as a promise, brought Nora to a sudden halt. Her heart raced at this unexpected crossroads. In Nora's breast, a tide of emotion welled up. She did not belong to James's world. She was just Nora, a waitress with rent to pay and modest dreams of distant travels. In recent days, she had offered Finn her small notes, her humming melodies, her paper tickets, not out of ambition, but because she saw in him a reflection of her younger self, a little girl who once yearned to be seen. But now James's offer swung open a door she had never dared to imagine. She hesitated. Her gaze flickered to the business card. Her finger brushed its edge, as if weighing a decision that could upend her life. She was afraid. Afraid she might not be enough. Afraid that James's world would swallow her simplicity. Yet deep inside, she felt a fierce longing, not only to help Finn, but to find a greater purpose for herself. James continued, his tone softer now, like a man laying bare his heart. He spoke of the empty house in Atlanta, its cold walls echoing the loneliness of both father and son. He confessed to nights spent outside Finn's door, at a loss for words, unsure how to draw him out of his silence. He looked to Nora, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, and said that she had taught him to see Finn, truly see him, not through the lens of a busy father, but through the heart of a listener. Those words struck Nora like a bittersweet blade. She realized her tiny acts had sown seeds of change not only in Finn, but in James as well. Quietly, Finn reached for Nora's hand. His small fingers, warm and trembling, were a silent plea. He looked up at Nora, his green eyes shining with fragile trust, and whispered, "Miss Nora, stay." That phrase, small but powerful, broke through every doubt in Nora's mind. Her heart melted, tears tracing down her cheeks, unstoppable. She looked at Finn and saw not just trust, but a promise that he needed her, not as a stranger, but as a guiding lighthouse. She bent down, nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Okay, I'll stay." James smiled, truly and for the first time, relief washing over him as though an invisible burden had lifted. Finn, hands still unsteady, drew the crumpled paper ticket from his pocket. He took Nora's pencil and slowly sketched a small sun, rough lines but radiant, and handed it to her. "A new journey," he said, his voice clearer than ever, as if he had found the light within himself. Nora held the ticket, her fingers clasping it tight. Her heart burst with joy. She was no longer just a waitress. She was part of Finn's journey, and of James's. A journey not only of finding a voice, but of finding each other. This story teaches us that sometimes small acts of kindness, a smile, a scrap of paper, a listening moment, can open doors that money could never reach. It reminds us that within each of us lies the power to change someone's life simply by pausing and truly seeing them. Thank you for sharing in this story. Please subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this tale with your family and friends in the United States. We'd love to know where and when you're watching this video if you found the story moving.